Dalton's hand tightens in Jackson's hair as torchlight flickers outside the barn. Voices shout accusations. Boots pound closer. The door rattles violently. Jackson's heart hammers. Discovery means death. Dalton's gray eyes burn into his. Whatever happens next, you're mine. The door splinters open. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. The dust settled slow across the ranch yard as the sun beat down merciless on another scorching afternoon. Jackson Reeves stood frozen at the barn door, his young heart hammering so loud he was certain the entire valley could hear it. Before him, silhouetted against the golden light streaming through the stable slats, stood Dalton Crow. The man was a legend across 3 territories, 6'4" of raw power wrapped in worn leather and faded denim. Dalton's shadow fell long across the hay-strewn floor, and when he turned, his steel-gray eyes locked onto Jackson with an intensity that made the young farmhand forget how to breathe. Jackson had arrived at the Crow Ranch 3 weeks ago, desperate for work after his family's farm had been swallowed by debt. He was 19, lean from hunger, and carried nothing but the clothes on his back, and a fierce determination to prove he was more than just another drifter. But from the moment Dalton had looked him over that first morning, something had shifted in the air between them, something Jackson had never felt before, something that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Now, as Dalton stepped closer, boot heels striking wood with deliberate rhythm, Jackson felt heat crawl up his neck. The older man moved like a predator, unhurried, confident. Every inch of him spoke of command, of a man who had broken wild horses and wilder men. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, his hands, calloused and strong, hung loose at his sides. But it was his eyes that held Jackson captive. Dark, knowing, hungry. "You been avoiding me, boy." Dalton's voice came low, rough as gravel underfoot. Jackson swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry as desert sand. "No, sir. I've been working." The words came out shakier than he intended. Dalton's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, more like a wolf deciding whether to circle or strike. "Working," he repeated, taking another step forward. "That what you call hiding in the north pasture all week? Fixing fences that did not need fixing?" Jackson's pulse raced. He wanted to step back, to put distance between himself and this overwhelming presence, but his legs would not obey. Instead, he stood rooted, watching as Dalton closed the space between them, until only a breath separated their bodies. The scent of leather, sweat, and something darker, something purely male, surrounded Jackson like smoke. "I seen the way you look at me," Dalton continued, his voice dropping even lower. "When you think I ain't watching." Panic flared in Jackson's chest, hot and sharp. He had been careful, or so he thought. In the bunkhouse at night, he would lie awake, replaying moments. The way Dalton's muscles moved beneath his shirt when he worked. The sound of his laugh, rare and rough. The casual touch of his hand on Jackson's shoulder that lingered just a heartbeat too long. "I don't," Jackson started, but the lie died on his lips when Dalton reached out. One large hand came to rest against the barn wall beside Jackson's head, caging him in. The other hand, slow as sin, lifted to Jackson's chin. Dalton's thumb brushed along his jaw, and Jackson's knees nearly buckled. "Do not lie to me, boy." Dalton's breath was warm against Jackson's face. "I got no patience for liars, and I sure as hell got no patience for cowards." The words should have stung, should have made Jackson angry. Instead, they set something loose inside him, something wild and desperate that he had been fighting since the day he arrived. His breath came quick and shallow. His hands trembled at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to protect himself, to deny what was building between them like a summer storm on the horizon. But Dalton's eyes held him fast. There was challenge there, and promise, and a heat that made Jackson's entire body ache with a need he barely understood. "You ever been with a man before?" Dalton asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Jackson's chest. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Jackson's face burned. He shook his head once, unable to form words. Dalton's thumb traced along Jackson's lower lip, and Jackson heard himself make a sound, small and helpless. "Thought so." Dalton's eyes darkened further, if that was even possible. "You got that look, like you were standing on the edge of something. and you do not know if you are about to fall or fly." Jackson's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I do not know what you want from me." Dalton leaned in, his lips so close to Jackson's ear that every word was a caress. "What I want, boy, is for you to stop pretending. Stop hiding. Stop acting like you do not feel this thing between us every time we are in the same room." His hand slid from Jackson's chin to the back of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. The touch was possessive, claiming. Jackson's eyes fluttered closed. "What if," he started, his voice shaken. "What if someone finds out? What if Dalton's grip tightened just enough to make Jackson gasp? This is my ranch, my land, my rules. And right now, the only thing that matters is what happens between you and me in this barn." He pulled back slightly, forcing Jackson to meet his gaze. "You want to walk away? You can. Door's right there. I will not stop you. I will not come after you. But if you stay, if you take one more breath standing this close to me, then you are mine. You understand?" Jackson's heart thundered. Every warning his mind screamed at him faded beneath the weight of Dalton's presence. He had spent his whole life being careful, being proper, being what everyone expected, and where had it gotten him? Alone, hungry, desperate for something he could not even name, until now, until this man had looked at him and seen past every wall he had built. Jackson tried again, but Dalton shook his head. "No more words, boy, just choice. Stay or go." The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Outside, a horse whinnied. The wind rattled the barn door. The sun continued its slow descent toward evening. And Jackson, standing in the shadow of a man who represented everything he had been taught to fear and everything he secretly craved, made his choice. He stayed. Dalton's eyes flared with something primal, something that made Jackson's knees weak. The older man's hand tightened in his hair, tilting his head back, exposing the long line of his throat. "Good boy." The words were approval and command rolled into one. "Now," Dalton continued, his voice taking on an edge that sent shivers down Jackson's spine, "we are going to take this slow, real slow, because you do not know what you are asking for yet, but you will. Oh, you will." His free hand came up to rest against Jackson's chest, right over his racing heart. "You feel that? That is fear and want all tangled up. That is what happens when you finally stop lying to yourself." Jackson could not speak, could barely think. All he could do was stand there, pinned by Dalton's gaze, held by his touch, and wonder what he had just agreed to. "You're going to learn, boy." Dalton's voice dropped to a whisper, dark and full of promise. "Learn what it means to submit, to trust, to let go of every fear you've been carrying and just feel." His thumb traced circles against Jackson's chest. "And when I am done with you, when you finally understand what it means to give yourself over completely, you're going to thank me for it." Jackson's breath hitched. The intensity in Dalton's eyes was overwhelming, consuming. This was not just attraction. This was something deeper, something that spoke to a hunger Jackson had not even known existed inside him. "But," Jackson managed, his voice barely audible, "what if I cannot?" Dalton's smile was slow, dangerous. "Oh, you can, and you will, because I see you, Jackson Reeves. See that wild thing inside you that you have been trying to cage your whole life, and I am going to set it free." The promise hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Jackson was not sure he was ready to understand. But as Dalton's hand slid from his chest to his hip, pulling him closer, Jackson realized something profound. For the first time in his life, he was not running, he was not hiding. He was standing still, letting himself be seen, letting himself want. And God help him, he wanted. The barn seemed to shrink around them, the world narrowing to just this moment. Dalton's presence, Jackson's surrender, and the unspoken understanding that everything was about to change. "Tomorrow," Dalton said finally, stepping back just enough to let Jackson breathe. "You meet me here. Sunset. And you come ready to listen, to learn, to do exactly as I say. Understood?" Jackson nodded, not trusting his voice. Dalton's hand came up one more time, cupping Jackson's face with surprising gentleness. "This ain't going to be easy, boy. What I am offering you, it is going to push you past every limit you think you got. But if you trust me, if you let me guide you, I promise you will find something you have been searching for your whole life." "What?" Jackson whispered. Dalton's smile was soft now, almost tender. "Freedom." And with that, he turned and walked out of the barn, leaving Jackson standing alone in the fading light, trembling with anticipation and fear and a desperate need he finally had a name for. That night, Jackson lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling while the other ranch hands snored around him. His mind replayed every moment, every word, every touch. He should leave. He knew that. Should pack his bedroll and disappear before dawn, before whatever Dalton had planned for tomorrow. But even as the thought formed, Jackson knew he would not go, could not go, because for the first time in his 19 years, someone had looked at him and seen him truly, not the polite farmhand, not the desperate drifter, but the real Jackson, the one he had kept hidden even from himself. And tomorrow, when the sun set and he walked back into that barn, he would finally discover what it meant to stop hiding, to stop running, to surrender to something bigger than fear. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of storm. And Jackson closed his eyes, letting anticipation wash over him like rain on parched earth, knowing that whatever came next would change him forever. But sleep would not come easily. Every time Jackson drifted close to the edge of unconsciousness, his mind would snap back to the barn, to Dalton's hand in his hair, to the weight of those gray eyes studying him like he was a puzzle worth solving, to the way his own body had responded, betraying every careful lie he had told himself for years. Jackson had known, of course, known since he was 15, and watching the blacksmith's apprentice work the forge, muscles gleaming with sweat. Known when he felt nothing but polite disinterest, when the merchant's daughter had smiled at him across the church social. Known in the hollow pit of his stomach every time his father spoke about finding him a proper wife, about carrying on the family name. But knowing and admitting were two different things entirely, and admitting and acting, well, that was a chasm he had never dared to cross. Until Dalton Crow had looked at him on that first morning and somehow seen straight through to the truth, Jackson kept locked away. The memory burned bright in Jackson's mind. He had been standing in the ranch yard, hat in hand, trying not to let desperation show on his face. Dalton had circled him slowly, the way a buyer might examine a horse at auction. But there had been something else in that appraisal, something that made Jackson's skin prickle with awareness. "You ever worked a ranch before?" Dalton had asked. "Some, sir. My family had a small farm." Dalton had stopped in front of him, close enough that Jackson had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "Your family had a farm." Past tense. What happened? Jackson's throat had tightened. Drought, then debt, then nothing left but dust and memories. Dalton had studied him for a long moment. "And you think you can handle the work here?" "Hard labor from sunup to sundown, following orders without question, living in close quarters with rough men who do not take kindly to weakness." "I can handle it," Jackson had said, lifting his chin. "I will work harder than any man you got. I will not complain. I will not cause trouble. I just need a chance." Something had flickered in Dalton's expression then, almost like recognition, like he saw something in Jackson that reminded him of another time, another desperate young man standing in this same yard. "All right, you got your chance, but I will hold you to those words. You work hard, you follow my orders, and you do not cause trouble. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Jackson had breathed, relief flooding through him. "Can you?" Dalton had repeated, his voice dropping lower. "Even when my orders are not what you expect? Even when following them means going against everything you have been taught?" Jackson had not understood then, had simply nodded, assuming Dalton meant the usual ranch work, the dangerous tasks, the back-breaking labor, the willingness to get dirty. He had not realized Dalton was talking about something else entirely. Now, lying in the dark, Jackson understood. Dalton had been asking for permission from the very beginning, testing him, waiting to see if Jackson would recognize the invitation buried in those words. 3 weeks. That was how long it had taken for the tension between them to reach breaking point. 3 weeks of Dalton finding reasons to work alongside Jackson in the fields. 3 weeks of casual touches that lingered. 3 weeks of conversations that started about cattle and horses but always seemed to drift somewhere deeper. Jackson had noticed other things too. The way Dalton's jaw would tighten when one of the other ranch hands got too friendly with Jackson. The dark look that crossed his face when Buck, the foreman, had clapped Jackson on the shoulder and invited him to ride into town for a drink. The careful distance Dalton maintained in front of the other men, never letting his gaze rest too long on Jackson, never allowing anything that might raise suspicion. But in those rare moments when they were alone, the mask would slip, and Jackson would catch glimpses of something fierce and hungry in Dalton's eyes, something that called to the hidden part of Jackson's soul like a wolf howling to its mate. He had tried to resist. God, he had tried. Stayed away from the main house where Dalton took his meals alone, volunteered for every distant task that would keep him far from the ranch yard, threw himself into exhausting work, hoping fatigue would drown out the constant awareness thrumming through his veins. But Dalton had patience, and Dalton had power. He simply waited, watching Jackson run himself, ragged trying to escape the inevitable. Until today, when he had cornered Jackson in the barn and forced the truth into the open. Jackson rolled onto his side, pulling the thin blanket up to his chin. Across the bunkhouse, someone coughed. Another man mumbled in his sleep. These were good men mostly, hard workers who asked few questions and minded their own business. But they were also products of this harsh land, and Jackson knew what would happen if they discovered the truth. At best, he would be driven off the ranch. At worst, well, he had heard stories about men found beaten in alleyways, about bodies dumped in ravines, about justice delivered at the end of a rope. Fear coiled in his gut, cold and familiar. But beneath it, stronger now, was that other feeling, the one Dalton had named so precisely: want. Desperate, aching want for something Jackson could not quite define. Not just physical touch, though his body craved that with an intensity that shocked him, but something deeper. Permission. Permission to stop pretending, to stop carrying the weight of expectations that did not fit, to simply exist as he was, without apology or shame. Dalton was offering that. In his own rough, commanding way, he was offering Jackson a space where the truth could breathe. But the price was surrender. Complete, terrifying surrender to a man Jackson barely knew. A man whose reputation across 3 territories was built on being harder, tougher, more uncompromising than anyone else. Could he do it? Could he walk into that barn tomorrow and place himself entirely in Dalton's hands? The question chased itself through Jackson's mind until finally, somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, exhaustion claimed him. His dreams were fragmented, heated. Dalton's voice in the darkness, strong hands guiding him, the overwhelming sensation of being completely, utterly seen. When the rooster crowed at first light, Jackson woke with his heart already racing. The day stretched ahead of him like a prison sentence, every minute crawling by with agonizing slowness. He went through the motions of his work mechanically, feeding the horses, mucking stalls, mending tack. Buck assigned him to ride the western fence line, checking for breaks, and Jackson was grateful for the solitude. Out there, with nothing but prairie and sky, he could let his thoughts run wild without worrying about what his face might reveal. The sun climbed high and merciless. Sweat soaked through Jackson's shirt. His hands worked automatically, twisting wire, hammering posts, while his mind played out a dozen different scenarios for tonight. What would Dalton actually want from him? The question burned. Jackson's knowledge of such things was limited to whispered rumors and carefully avoided topics. He knew the basics, of course, but knowing in theory and experiencing in practice were vastly different things. Dalton had promised to take it slow, to teach him, but what did that mean? And more importantly, Could Jackson trust a man he had known for less than a month with something so precious, so vulnerable? The sun had passed its peak and started its long descent toward the western horizon when Jackson finally turned his horse back toward the ranch, his stomach twisted with nerves. Part of him wanted to keep riding, to disappear into the endless prairie and never look back. But a stronger part, the part Dalton had awakened, pulled him forward, toward the ranch, toward the barn, toward whatever waited in the gathering dusk. Back at the bunkhouse, Jackson washed up at the pump, scrubbing the dust and sweat from his skin. His hands shook slightly as he changed into his one clean shirt. The other men were gathering for supper, their voices carrying across the yard. Jackson knew he should join them, should maintain his normal routine, but the thought of food made his stomach churn. Instead, he sat on his bunk, watching the light change outside the window, gold fading to amber, amber deepening to orange, orange bleeding into red, sunset approaching. His pulse quickened. In an hour, maybe less, he would walk across that yard and into the barn, and everything would change. Everything. "Are you coming to supper or what?" Buck's voice startled Jackson from his thoughts. The foreman stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on his pants. Cook made stew. Actually tastes like food for once. Jackson forced a smile. "Not hungry. Think I will turn in early." Buck's eyes narrowed slightly. "You feeling all right? You have been acting strange all day." "I am fine," Jackson said quickly. "Just tired. Long day on the fence line." Buck studied him for another moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. More for the rest of us." After he left, Jackson released a shaky breath. He needed to be more careful, needed to maintain the appearance of normalcy even as his entire world tilted on its axis. The voices from the dining hall faded as the men settled into their meal. Jackson stood, moving to the window. From here he could see the barn, its weathered wood darkening in the fading light. A lamp glowed in one of the stalls. Dalton was already there, waiting. Jackson's mouth went dry, his hands clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed conflicting orders: run, stay, hide, surrender. The war inside him raged as the sun touched the horizon. He thought about his father, dead now, 3 years. About the disappointment that would have filled his eyes if he could see Jackson in this moment. About his mother, who had whispered on her deathbed that she only wanted him to be happy, though Jackson suspected she had never imagined happiness might look like this. He thought about the long, lonely years, stretching ahead if he walked away now. Years of hiding, of pretending, of dying slowly inside while maintaining a careful lie. And he thought about Dalton's words. Freedom. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and violet. Jackson took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked out of the bunkhouse. His boots struck the hard-packed earth with steady rhythm. One step, then another. Across the yard, past the corral where horses dozed in the twilight. Toward the barn, toward Dalton, toward himself. The barn door stood open, golden lamplight spilling out into the gathering dark. Jackson paused at the threshold, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. This was it, the moment of choice, the point of no return. He stepped inside. Dalton stood in the center of the space, arms crossed, his powerful frame backlit by the lamp hanging from a beam. He had changed clothes too, Jackson noticed, wore a clean shirt, dark pants, boots polished to a dull shine. Like this mattered, like Jackson mattered. Their eyes met, held. "You came," Dalton said softly. It was not a question, but Jackson answered anyway. "I came." Dalton's expression shifted, something fierce and possessive flaring in his gaze. "Close the door, boy." Jackson's hand trembled as he pulled the heavy door shut, plunging them into intimate isolation. The lamp's glow seemed brighter now, more focused. The rest of the world ceased to exist. There was only this space, this man, this moment. Dalton moved closer, his footsteps deliberate. He stopped just within arm's reach, studying Jackson's face with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "You scared?" "Yes," Jackson whispered. "Good." Dalton's hand came up, cupping Jackson's jaw with surprising gentleness. "Fear means you understand what you are risking, means you're not walking into this blind." His thumb brushed across Jackson's cheekbone. "But you still came. That tells me everything I need to know." "What does it tell you?" Jackson asked, his voice barely audible. Dalton leaned closer, his breath warm against Jackson's lips. "That you are braver than you think, and that you are ready to stop lying to yourself." He stepped back slightly, letting his hand fall away. "Now, here is how this works. I am going to ask you questions, and you are going to answer honestly. No more hiding, no more pretending, just truth. Can you do that?" Jackson nodded. "Out loud, boy. I need to hear you say it." "I can do that," Jackson said, his voice stronger now. "Good." Dalton circled around him slowly, and Jackson fought the urge to turn, to keep him in sight. This was part of it, he realized, learning to be vulnerable, to trust. "Have you ever kissed a man?" Dalton asked from behind him. "No." "Have you ever wanted to?" Jackson's breath caught. "Yes." "How long?" "Since I was 15. Maybe longer. I do not know exactly when it started. Just that one day I realized I was not like other boys." Dalton appeared in front of him again, his eyes searching. "And you have been carrying that alone all this time?" Jackson's throat tightened. "Who could I tell? My father would have beaten me. The preacher would have condemned me. The other boys, they would have." His voice broke. "They would have killed me. Probably." Dalton's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "This world is not kind to men like us. I learned that lesson young, but I also learned that hiding yourself away, living half a life out of fear, that is its own kind of death. Better to burn bright and risk everything than to fade slow into nothing." "Is that what you did?" Jackson asked. "Burn bright?" Dalton's smile was bitter. "I tried. Loved a man once when I was not much older than you. Railroad worker passing through. Thought we had something real." He paused, jaw tightening. "Turned out he was just looking for entertainment before moving on. Left me with a broken heart and a harsh lesson about trust." Jackson felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. "I am sorry." Dalton shrugged. "Past is past, but it taught me something important. If you are going to give yourself to someone, you better make damn sure they understand what they are receiving, and you better make sure you understand what you are asking for." He reached out, fingers tracing the line of Jackson's collar. "So I am going to be very clear with you, boy. What I want, what I am offering, it is not some quick fumble in the dark. It is not stolen moments and shame-filled mornings after. What I want is complete honesty, complete trust. You give yourself to me, and I will protect that gift with everything I have. But I will also push you, test you, make you face parts of yourself you have been running from." Jackson swallowed hard. "And if I cannot handle it, then you tell me, and we stop. Simple as that." Dalton's hand moved to rest over Jackson's racing heart. "But I do not think you will want to stop. I think once you get a taste of what it feels like to be truly free, to be seen and accepted exactly as you are, you will never want to go back to hiding." The words settled over Jackson like a warm blanket. This was not just about physical desire. This was about being known, being understood, being given permission to exist. "Can I ask you something?" Jackson said quietly. "Anything. What do you see when you look at me?" Dalton's eyes never wavered. "I see myself 7 years ago. Scared, alone, desperate for someone to tell me I was not broken. I see strength you do not know you have yet. I see potential waiting to be unlocked. And yeah," he added, his voice dropping lower, "I see a beautiful young man who makes me want things I swore I would never risk again." Jackson's breath hitched. "You think I am beautiful?" Dalton's laugh was rough. "Boy, you are the most beautiful thing I have seen in years. Why do you think I have been half crazy watching you work? Why do you think I have been finding excuses to be near you?" He shook his head. "Been fighting myself for 3 weeks trying to do the right thing. Trying to let you come to this on your own. But when I saw you hiding from me, running scared, I knew I had to force the issue, had to make you face what is between us." Jackson's pulse raced. His entire body felt too hot, too tight, like his skin could not contain everything building inside him. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. Dalton's hand slid up to cup the back of his neck. That is why I am going to teach you. Slow, careful. We are going to take this one step at a time. And the first step," he leaned in until their foreheads nearly touched, "is learning that you can trust me. That when I push, it is not to break you. It is to help you discover just how strong you really are. Can you trust me, Jackson?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This was it, the real moment of decision. Not just agreeing to meet in the barn, but choosing to place himself completely in Dalton's hands, to surrender control, to believe that this hard, rough man would handle his vulnerability with care. Jackson looked into those steel-gray eyes and saw truth, saw understanding, saw his own fear and want reflected back at him. And beneath it all, he saw something he had not expected: tenderness. But before he could answer, a flood of memories washed over him. Every moment of isolation, every Sunday sermon warning of eternal damnation, every sideways glance from townspeople who sensed something different about him, even if they could not name it. He remembered being 13, watching 2 ranch hands get dragged from a barn and beaten bloody while the sheriff looked the other way. Their crime had been whispered about for weeks after: unnatural acts against God and nature. Jackson had watched from his bedroom window, terror freezing him in place as the men were driven from town with threats of worse if they ever returned. That night, he had prayed for hours, begged God to take away whatever was wrong inside him, to make him normal, to let him feel what other boys felt when they looked at girls. But the prayer had gone unanswered, and over the years, Jackson had learned to bury that part of himself so deep he sometimes convinced himself it did not exist. Until Dalton, until a man had looked at him and somehow known, had seen past every carefully constructed wall to the truth Jackson had spent his life hiding. The weight of that recognition was both terrifying and liberating. "I am scared," Jackson admitted, his voice cracking. "Not of you, but of what this means. Of what could happen if anyone found out. Of losing everything again, but this time losing myself too." Dalton's grip on his neck tightened, not painfully, but reassuringly. "Fear is smart, keeps you careful, keeps you alive. I have been scared every day of my adult life, scared someone will see too much, say too much, put the pieces together." He leaned his forehead against Jackson's. "But I learned something important. Living scared is not the same as living free, and I would rather have one true moment, one honest connection, than a lifetime of safe lies." His thumb stroked along Jackson's jaw. "You think I do not know the risk? I have seen what this world does to men like us. Hell, I have scars to prove it, but I also know what happens when you deny yourself so completely that you forget who you are. You become a ghost, walking through life without ever really living." Jackson felt tears sting his eyes. He blinked them back, but Dalton saw. The older man's expression softened further, and he pulled Jackson close, wrapping his arms around him completely. "It is all right to be scared," Dalton murmured into his hair. "It is all right to cry. You have been carrying this alone for so long, but you do not have to anymore. The dam broke." Jackson buried his face against Dalton's shoulder and let the tears come. Years of loneliness, of shame, of desperate prayers for something to change. All of it poured out while Dalton held him steady, one hand stroking his back, the other cradling his head. No words, just presence, just acceptance. When the storm finally passed, Jackson pulled back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Sorry," he muttered. "I did not mean to. Do not apologize." Dalton's voice was firm. "Not for this, not for feeling. You have spent too long apologizing for existing. That ends now." He waited until Jackson met his eyes. "You asked if you can trust me. Here is my answer. I will never ask you to be anything other than what you are. I will never make you feel ashamed for wanting what you want. And I will do everything in my power to keep you safe while you figure out who that is." Jackson's breath caught. That was more than he had dared hope for, more than he thought possible. "Yes," Jackson breathed, his voice steadier now. I can trust you." Dalton's smile was slow, genuine, and filled with something that looked like relief. "Then we begin." Dalton's hands were steady as he reached for Jackson, but there was fire in his eyes, the kind of fire that promised both danger and salvation. He cupped Jackson's face between his palms, thumbs tracing the line of his jaw with reverence that made Jackson's knees weak. "I am going to kiss you now," Dalton said, his voice rough silk. "And when I do, I want you to stop thinking. Stop worrying about what you should or should not feel. Just let yourself experience it." Jackson nodded, unable to form words. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack them. Every breath felt too shallow, like his lungs had forgotten their purpose. Dalton leaned in slowly, giving Jackson every opportunity to pull away. But Jackson stood frozen, caught between terror and longing as the distance between them closed. When their lips finally met, the world tilted. It was nothing like Jackson had imagined. Softer, more intense, like lightning striking in slow motion, setting fire to everything it touched. Dalton's mouth moved against his with gentle pressure, coaxing rather than demanding. One hand slid into Jackson's hair while the other gripped his hip, anchoring him. Jackson made a sound, small and helpless, and Dalton responded by deepening the kiss. His tongue traced the seam of Jackson's lips, requesting entry, and when Jackson opened to him, the sensation nearly buckled his knees. Dalton tasted like whiskey, and something darker, something purely him. The kiss built slowly, Dalton controlling the pace, teaching Jackson without words how to respond, when to yield, when to press forward, how to let sensation wash over him without overthinking. Time lost meaning. Jackson had no idea if they stood there for seconds or hours. All he knew was Dalton's mouth on his, Dalton's hands holding him steady, and the overwhelming feeling of rightness that flooded through him. When Dalton finally pulled back, Jackson was breathing hard, lips swollen, eyes glazed. He swayed slightly, and Dalton's hands tightened on him. "Easy, boy," Dalton murmured. "I got you." Jackson blinked, trying to clear his head. "That was," he started, but words failed him. Dalton's smile was knowing. That was just the beginning. "Come here." He led Jackson deeper into the barn, to where a pile of clean hay had been spread with blankets. A pitcher of water sat nearby, along with 2 tin cups. Dalton had planned this, had prepared. The realization sent a fresh wave of heat through Jackson. "Sit," Dalton commanded gently, and Jackson obeyed. Dalton settled beside him, close enough that their thighs touched. He poured water into both cups, handing one to Jackson. "Drink. You look like you might pass out." Jackson took the cup with trembling hands, gulping the cool water gratefully. His entire body felt electrified, every nerve ending singing with awareness of Dalton's proximity. "Better?" Dalton asked. Jackson nodded. "That was, I've never." His face burned. "I know," Dalton said, his voice gentle. "That is why we are taking this slow. I meant what I said about teaching you. But first, I need to know your boundaries." He shifted to face Jackson more fully. "I need you to tell me what you are comfortable with tonight, and what you are not ready for." Jackson's mind raced. He barely knew what the options were, let alone what his limits might be. "I trust you," he said finally, "to decide." Dalton shook his head. "No, that is not how this works. I will not take advantage of your inexperience. You get a say, always. So think about it. What do you want from tonight?" Jackson took a shaky breath. His eyes met Dalton's, finding safety there despite his fear. "I want," he paused, gathering courage. "I want to feel connected to someone, to you. I want to stop being so alone. I want to understand what all of this means." He gestured vaguely between them. "But I'm scared. Of pain. Of not knowing what to do. Of disappointing you." Dalton's expression softened. "You could not disappoint me if you tried. Just being here, being honest, that is more than enough." He reached out, running his fingers through Jackson's hair. "Here is what I'm thinking for tonight. More kissing, touching, but over clothes, learning each other, getting comfortable with the feel of another man's hands on you. Nothing more, Nothing that will push you too far too fast. Does that sound acceptable? Relief and a strange disappointment warred in Jackson's chest. He nodded. Yes. Good. Dalton leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to Jackson's temple. Remember, you can tell me to stop at any time. You say stop, and I stop. No questions. No anger. Understood? Understood, Jackson whispered. Then come here. Dalton pulled Jackson against him, arranging them so Jackson's back rested against Dalton's broad chest. Jackson stiffened initially, unused to being held, but Dalton's arms around him were steady and sure. Relax, Dalton murmured against his ear. Just breathe. Feel. Slowly, Jackson let himself soften into the embrace. Dalton's warmth seeped into him, chasing away the chill of a lifetime of isolation. He could feel Dalton's heartbeat against his back, strong and steady. One of Dalton's hands rested on Jackson's chest, over his heart. The other traced absent patterns on his arm. This is what I want you to learn first, Dalton said quietly. That being close to another person does not have to mean losing yourself, that you can let someone hold you and still be strong. That vulnerability is not weakness. Jackson closed his eyes, letting the words and the sensation wash over him. For so long, he had been rigid with the effort of maintaining his mask. Now, in Dalton's arms, he felt that rigidity cracking. Tell me about your family, Dalton said. The request surprised Jackson. Is not this supposed to be physical? Dalton's laugh rumbled through his chest. This is about connection, remember? I want to know you, all of you, not just your body. So tell me, where did you grow up? What were your parents like? And so Jackson talked, haltingly at first, then with increasing ease. He told Dalton about the small farm, about his father's stern silence and his mother's quiet kindness, about the drought that had broken them, about watching his father age 10 years in one summer as the crops failed and the debt mounted. Dalton listened without interrupting, his hands continuing their gentle exploration. Occasionally, he would press a kiss to Jackson's temple or the curve of his neck, and Jackson would lose his train of thought, distracted by sensation. It was intimate in a way Jackson had not anticipated. More intimate, somehow, than the kiss had been. Being held, being heard, being accepted. When Jackson's story wound down, Dalton shared his own, about growing up on a ranch much like this one, the youngest of 3 brothers, about losing his family to disease when he was 20, about the railroad worker who had broken his heart, about building this ranch from nothing, determined to create a space where he answered to no one. Their stories wove together in the lamplight. 2 lonely men finding unexpected understanding. And somewhere in the telling, Jackson realized he was not afraid anymore. Dalton shifted slightly, turning Jackson to face him. Their eyes met, and Jackson saw his own wonder reflected there. You're doing so well, Dalton said softly. Being so brave. I want to kiss you again. Can I? Yes, Jackson breathed. Please. This kiss was different, slower, deeper. Dalton's tongue explored Jackson's mouth with leisurely thoroughness, teaching him the rhythm, the give and take. Jackson's hands came up hesitantly, resting on Dalton's shoulders, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt. Dalton made an approving sound and pulled Jackson closer until they were pressed together from chest to knee. The heat between them built gradually. Dalton's hand slid down Jackson's back, settling at the small of his back, holding him steady as the kiss intensified. Jackson felt dizzy with sensation, overwhelmed in the best possible way. When Dalton's lips left his mouth to trail along his jaw, Jackson gasped. Sensitive there, Dalton noted with satisfaction. His mouth moved to Jackson's neck, finding the rapid pulse point and sucking gently. Jackson's hands tightened convulsively on Dalton's shoulders. The feeling was indescribable, like lightning racing through his veins, like drowning in the sweetest way possible. Dalton, he managed, his voice breaking. I know, Dalton murmured against his skin. I feel it too. His hand moved to Jackson's chest, fingers finding the buttons of his shirt. Can I open this? I want to feel your skin. Jackson nodded frantically, beyond words. Dalton worked the buttons open with practiced ease, pushing the fabric aside to reveal Jackson's chest. His hand splayed across Jackson's ribcage, warm and possessive. Beautiful, Dalton said, his voice rough with want. So damn beautiful. Jackson had never thought of himself that way. Had always been too thin, too plain. But the way Dalton looked at him, touched him, made him feel like he was something precious, something worth treasuring. Dalton's mouth returned to his, swallowing Jackson's soft sounds as his hands explored, tracing collarbones, counting ribs, thumbs brushing across sensitive skin that made Jackson arch into the touch. It was too much and not enough all at once. Jackson's own hands grew bolder, sliding under Dalton's shirt to feel the hard muscle underneath. Dalton groaned approval, breaking the kiss to pull his own shirt over his head. "Now we are even," he said, with a slight smile. Jackson stared. Dalton's body was a map of hard work and harder living. Scars crossed his chest and ribs. Muscle moved under tan skin. Dark hair dusted across his pectorals, trailing down his stomach. He was magnificent. "Touch me," Dalton said. "I want to feel your hands on me." With trembling fingers, Jackson reached out. Dalton's skin was warm, the hair softer than he expected. He traced the line of a scar, and Dalton shivered. "Knife fight in Denver," Dalton explained. 5 years back. Remind me to tell you that story sometime. Jackson continued his exploration, fascinated by the differences between their bodies. Where he was lean, Dalton was solid. Where he was smooth, Dalton was marked by life. Dalton let him explore at will, his breathing growing heavier but his hands remaining patient on Jackson's waist. When Jackson's fingers accidentally brushed across one of Dalton's nipples, the older man hissed. "Do that again," Dalton commanded roughly. Jackson obeyed, watching in fascination as Dalton's eyes fluttered closed. The sense of power was intoxicating, that he could affect this strong, controlled man with just a touch. "Enough," Dalton said finally, catching Jackson's wrists. His eyes were dark with desire. "You are a quick learner, too quick. We need to slow down." But Jackson did not want to slow down. For the first time in his life, he felt alive, felt present in his own body, felt connected to another human being in a way that transcended loneliness. "Please," he whispered. "Please what?" Dalton's grip on his wrist tightened. "Tell me what you want, Jackson." "I want," Jackson struggled to put it into words. "I want to feel everything. I want you to touch me more. I want," his voice dropped. "I want to touch you more." Dalton's control visibly wavered, his jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice was strained. "You are testing my patience, boy. I promise to go slow, to not push you, but you are making it damn difficult." "Then maybe," Jackson said, emboldened by the desire he saw in Dalton's eyes, "maybe I do not want slow. Maybe I want." He could not finish, could not quite voice the depth of his need. Dalton studied him for a long moment, then he released Jackson's wrists and cupped his face. "Listen to me carefully. What we are doing right now, this is already more than most men in your position would be ready for. You are overwhelmed, caught up in new sensations. Tomorrow, in the clear light of day, you might feel differently, might regret moving too fast. I will not be the one who takes advantage of that." Jackson wanted to argue, wanted to insist he knew his own mind. But something in Dalton's expression stopped him. This was not rejection, it was protection. Care, even. "You're right," Jackson said finally. "I am overwhelmed, but not in a bad way." Dalton's thumb traced his swollen lips. "I know, and we will get there. I promise. But tonight is about building trust, about learning each other. The physical, that'll come. But it has to be built on something solid. Otherwise, it is just bodies. And you deserve more than that." The words settled something restless in Jackson's chest. He nodded, leaning into Dalton's touch. "Okay. Okay," Dalton echoed. "Now come here." He pulled Jackson down onto the blankets, arranging them so they lay face to face. The lamp cast dancing shadows across the barn walls. Outside, night creatures called to each other. Inside, two men held each other in the intimate darkness. Dalton's hand rested on Jackson's waist, his thumb drawing circles. On the bare skin of his hip, Jackson's head rested on Dalton's outstretched arm, their faces inches apart. "This is enough," Dalton said softly. "Just this, being close, being honest. Everything else will follow in its own time." Jackson studied Dalton's face in the lamplight. The strong jaw, the slight crook in his nose where it had been broken, the gray eyes that saw too much. He realized he was memorizing this moment, storing it away like treasure. "Can I ask you something?" Jackson said. "Always." "Why me? Of all the men who have worked for you, why did you choose me?" Dalton was quiet for a moment. "Because you remind me of who I used to be, before I learned to be hard, before I built walls so high nobody could reach me. You still have softness in you, hope. And his voice roughened, I wanted to protect that. Wanted to be the one who showed you that you do not have to lose yourself to survive in this world." Jackson felt tears prick his eyes. Nobody had ever wanted to protect him before. Not like this. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. For giving me this. For making me feel less alone." Dalton pulled him closer, tucking Jackson's head under his chin. "You are not alone anymore. As long as I am breathing, you are not alone." They lay like that for a long time, neither speaking. Jackson listened to Dalton's heartbeat, steady and sure. He felt Dalton's hand in his hair, stroking gently, and slowly the remaining tension drained from his body. He had been so afraid of being discovered, afraid of damnation, afraid of his own desires. But here, in Dalton's arms, none of that mattered. There was only this moment, this man, this unexpected grace. "You are falling asleep," Dalton observed, amusement in his voice. Jackson made a non-committal sound, too comfortable to move. Dalton chuckled. "Come on, boy. You cannot sleep here. Need to get you back to the bunkhouse before someone notices you're gone." Jackson groaned but allowed Dalton to help him sit up. His limbs felt heavy, languid. His lips were tender from kissing. His heart felt full to bursting. Dalton helped him back into his shirt, fingers lingering on the buttons. "Tomorrow," Dalton said, "meet me at the north pasture after morning chores. We will ride out to check the cattle, just the two of us." Jackson nodded, already anticipating it. "And tomorrow night?" Dalton's smile was slow. "Tomorrow night we will see. Depends on how brave you are feeling." He pulled Jackson close for one last kiss, this one tender and promising. "But know this, now that I have tasted you, touched you, held you, I am not letting you go. You are mine, Jackson Reeves, and I take care of what is mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened Jackson. Instead, it made him feel secure, claimed, wanted. "I am yours," he agreed softly. Dalton walked him to the barn door, checking to make sure the yard was clear. The dining hall was dark now. The men retired to the bunkhouse. "You go first," Dalton said. "I will. Follow in a few minutes. Keep your head down. Act natural. If anyone asks, you were taking a walk to clear your head." Jackson nodded. He stepped into the night, the cool air a shock after the barn's warmth. He made his way across the yard, hyper-aware of every sound. But luck was with him. The bunkhouse was dark and quiet when he slipped inside. He undressed quickly, sliding into his bunk. Around him, men snored and shifted in their sleep. None of them knew what had happened tonight. None of them knew Jackson was fundamentally changed. He pressed his fingers to his lips, still able to feel the ghost of Dalton's kiss. His body hummed with remembered sensation. His heart felt like it might burst from his chest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He would have to maintain the facade, pretend nothing had shifted. But tonight, in the darkness, Jackson allowed himself a smile. He was not alone, not anymore. And whatever came next, whatever trials they would face, he would face them knowing he had been seen, been chosen, been claimed by a man who understood him in ways no one ever had. Sleep came easier than he expected. his last thought before drifting off a simple truth. He had been so afraid of falling, but it turned out falling felt a lot like flying. The next weeks unfolded in a pattern of stolen moments and careful secrets. By day, Jackson worked alongside the other ranch hands, maintaining the fiction that he was just another hired man, but his eyes constantly sought Dalton, tracking his movements across the ranch yard. And Dalton, for his part, found endless reasons to work near Jackson, to assign him tasks that kept him close, to create opportunities for their hands to brush as they passed tools, to exchange looks weighted with private meaning. The other men noticed nothing, or if they did, they attributed it to Dalton taking special interest in training the new hand. Buck commented once that the boss seemed to be riding Jackson harder than usual, making him prove his worth. Jackson had ducked his head to hide his smile, knowing the truth was both more complicated and simpler than Buck could imagine. The nights were Jackson's treasure. After the ranch settled into sleep, he would slip from the bunkhouse and make his way to the barn. Dalton would be waiting, lamplight soft on his features, hands ready to pull Jackson close. They talked for hours, sharing histories and dreams. Dalton told stories of his youth, of the wild years before he settled on the ranch. Jackson spoke of books he had read, of a world beyond the prairie he had only imagined, and they kissed, long, slow kisses that taught Jackson the geography of Dalton's mouth, heated kisses that left them both breathless and aching, tender kisses that spoke of things neither was quite ready to say aloud. Dalton kept his promise about going slow. His hands explored with careful patience, mapping Jackson's body over his clothes, teaching him to recognize and voice his desires, learning what touches made Jackson gasp, what kisses made him whimper, what words made his eyes go dark with want. In return, Jackson grew bolder. His initial shyness gave way to curiosity, then to confidence. He learned Dalton's sensitive places, the spot behind his ear, the hollow of his throat, the ridge of his hip bone. He learned how to touch, to tease, to please, to make this powerful man tremble. But they always stopped before going too far. Dalton was adamant about that. Building trust, he would say, even as his breathing came hard and his hands shook with restraint. Making sure you are ready, not just physically, but here. He would tap Jackson's chest, over his heart. One night, 3 weeks into their secret courtship, Jackson found the courage to ask the question that had been building. When? His voice was quiet in the lamp-lit barn. When will we? He could not finish, but Dalton understood. The older man pulled Jackson into his lap, arranging them so Jackson straddled his thighs. Their faces were level, eyes locked. When I am certain you understand what you're asking for. When I know beyond doubt that you want this because you want me, not because you are desperate to prove something. When you can tell me exactly what you need without shame or fear. He cupped Jackson's face. This is not just about physical desire, boy. This is about trust, about commitment. Once we cross that line, there is no going back. You will be mine completely, and I will be responsible for you, for your safety, for your heart. That is not something I take lightly. Jackson's throat tightened. I want that. Want you. Want all of it. I know you do. Dalton's smile was tender. And you will have it. Soon. But not tonight. Tonight, I want you to go back to your bunk and think about what happens after the heat fades and reality sets in. Think about what it means to be tied to a man like me in a world like this. Think about the danger, the secrets, the constant fear of discovery. Make sure you are willing to accept all of that, because once we take this step, I will not let you go. Jackson wanted to protest that he had already thought about all of it, but Dalton's expression told him there was more to consider, deeper implications he had not yet faced. All right, he agreed. I will think about it. Good boy. Dalton kissed him softly. Now go, before I lose what little control I have left. Jackson made his way back to the bunkhouse, his body frustrated, but his heart full. He lay in his bunk, thinking about Dalton's words, about what it would mean to fully commit to this path. The risks were real. Discovery could mean death for both of them. Even if they avoided that fate, Jackson would spend his life hiding the most important relationship he had. There would be no public acknowledgement, no future of building a life openly together. just stolen moments and constant vigilance. He thought about the alternative, walking away, finding a woman to marry, living the expected life. It would be safe, acceptable, normal, but it would also be a lie, a slow death of the soul. Jackson had tasted truth now, had felt what it was like to be authentic, to connect deeply with another person, to be seen and accepted for exactly who he was. Could he really go back to hiding after that? The answer came clear and certain. No, he could not, would not. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, he wanted Dalton, wanted this life they were building in the shadows, wanted to be claimed and held and loved by a man who understood him completely. The next night, when he slipped into the barn, Dalton took one look at his face and knew. "You have decided," Dalton said. Jackson nodded. "I want you, all of this, whatever comes with it." Dalton closed his eyes briefly, emotion flickering across his features. Then he opened them, and Jackson saw everything: desire, possession, love. "Then come here, boy, and let me show you what it means to be mine." What followed was a slow unraveling. Dalton led Jackson to the blankets, laid him down with reverence. The lamplight painted gold across bare skin as clothes were shed with trembling hands. Every touch was worship, every kiss a promise. Dalton mapped Jackson's body with hands and mouth, learning him completely, teaching him pleasure in waves that built and crested and built again. And Jackson surrendered, let himself be guided, shaped, claimed. Let Dalton show him what his body was capable of feeling. Let himself fall completely into trust. When it was over, they lay tangled together, hearts racing, skin damp with sweat. Jackson felt transformed, reborn, like he had shed an old skin and emerged into something new and true. Dalton held him close, pressing kisses to his temple, his cheek, his lips. "Mine," he murmured. "My boy, my Jackson, yours," Jackson agreed, voice rough. "Always yours." Outside, the world continued unchanged. But inside the barn, two men had found something rare and precious. Something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth the risk. They dozed together as the lamp burned low, neither willing to let go just yet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they had this: each other, truth, and love, though neither had said the word yet. It hung in the air between them, as real and tangible as the blankets that covered them, as warm as the hands that held them. When Jackson finally crept back to the bunkhouse in the hours before dawn, he carried with him the certainty that he had made the right choice. He was Dalton's, and Dalton was his. Everything else they would figure out together. The sun rose on a new day. Jackson faced it without fear, knowing that whatever came, he would not face it alone. He had found his home, not in a place, but in a person, and that was worth everything. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both dangerous and natural. Jackson learned to live two lives. By day, he was the quiet ranch hand who worked hard and kept his head down. By night, he became someone else entirely, someone who could laugh freely, someone who could touch and be touched without shame, someone who belonged. Dalton taught him more than physical intimacy. He taught him how to read the ranch politics, how to navigate Buck's suspicions with carefully casual responses, how to maintain friendships with the other hands without letting them get too close, how to be invisible while hiding in plain sight. But more importantly, Dalton taught him about himself, about the difference between want and need, about how to voice desires without shame, about the strength it took to be vulnerable, about trust as something earned slowly, carefully, over time. One evening, about 2 months after that first night in the barn, Jackson sat on the porch of Dalton's house. The other hands thought he was there to discuss a problem with the northern fence. In reality, they were sharing a bottle of whiskey and watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "You have changed," Dalton observed, his voice quiet. "Not in a bad way, but you carry yourself different now, more confident." Jackson considered this. "I feel different, like I finally fit inside my own skin." Dalton's hand found his under the cover of shadow between their chairs. "That is what freedom does. Makes you realize how much energy you were wasting on pretending. Jackson laced their fingers together, marveling at how natural it felt now. This touch that would have terrified him months ago. Do you ever wish things were different? That we could just be open about this? Every day, Dalton admitted. But wishing does not change reality. We live in a world that would rather see us dead than happy. So we adapt. We survive. We steal moments where we can. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then, I love you. The words came out softer than he intended, but no less true for their gentleness. Dalton's hand tightened on his. His throat worked, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I know. I have known for a while. Been waiting for you to realize it yourself. Are not you going to say it back? Jackson asked, trying for lightness, but unable to hide the vulnerability beneath. Dalton turned to look at him fully, his gray eyes blazing in the fading light. I loved you from the moment you walked into my ranch yard, desperate and proud and trying so hard not to show your fear. I loved you when you ran from me for 3 weeks, fighting what was between us. I loved you the first time I kissed you and felt you surrender. He brought Jackson's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. And I will love you until the day I die, whether I can say it out loud or not. Jackson felt his eyes burn. That was more than he had hoped for, more than he thought he deserved. Come inside, Dalton said, standing and pulling Jackson up with him. Let me show you what those words mean. Inside the house, with the curtains drawn and the lamps burning low, they came together. With a desperation born of love finally acknowledged, every touch was a declaration, every kiss a promise, every whispered word a vow that neither could make before witnesses, but that felt no less binding for their privacy. Afterward, lying tangled in Dalton's bed, Jackson traced the scars on his lover's chest. Each one had a story. Each one represented survival. Tell me about this one, Jackson said, fingers following a long ridge along Dalton's ribs. Dalton's hand covered his, still in the movement. Got thrown from a horse when I was 22. Broke 3 ribs and punctured a lung. Doc said I should have died. He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes I think I did die that day. The young man I was, the one who still believed the world might change, might become more accepting. That version of me died when I was lying in that dirt, struggling to breathe, and realized nobody was coming to help because they were all too busy laughing at the fool who could not stay on his horse. Jackson pressed a kiss to the scar. I am glad you survived, even if it meant losing that version of yourself. Dalton's arms tightened around him. I am too, because if I had not survived, I never would have met you. And you, Jackson Reeves, you made me remember what it feels like to hope again. They lay in comfortable silence, skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. Outside, the ranch settled into sleep. Inside, 2 men held each other and dreamed of impossible futures. I wish we could leave, Jackson said eventually. Just pack up and ride away. Find somewhere nobody knows us. Somewhere we could just be together without hiding. Dalton sighed. I have thought about it. More times than I can count. But running is not the answer. We would just be strangers in a strange place, starting over with nothing. At least here, we have the ranch. We have a life, even if it has to be secret. But what kind of life is it? Jackson asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Always hiding, always afraid, never able to just exist. It is the life we have, Dalton said gently. And it is better than the alternative. Better than being alone. Better than denying what we are. We make the best of what we have, and we protect each other. That is all we can do. Jackson knew he was right, but it did not stop the ache in his chest for something more. Something impossible. Someday, Dalton continued, his voice thoughtful, maybe things will change. Maybe the world will become a place where men like us do not have to hide. I probably will not live to see it. But maybe you will. Jackson pressed closer. I do not want to think about a world without you in it. Dalton kissed the top of his head. Then do not. Think about tomorrow. About the day after. About the moments we steal and the life we build in the shadows. That's enough. It has to be. And it was enough. Not perfect. Not what either of them would have chosen if given complete freedom. But real. Honest. True. As the night deepened and sleep began to claim them, Jackson realized something profound. He had been so afraid of being discovered, of losing everything. But the truth was, he had already lost everything once when his family's farm failed, and he had survived. He was stronger than he knew, more resilient, more capable of adapting. Whatever came, whatever challenges they would face, he and Dalton would face them together. That was the promise they made to each other without words, the vow written in touch and trust and love, too deep for simple language. Tomorrow, Jackson would wake before dawn and slip back to the bunkhouse. He would work alongside the other hands, maintaining the fiction. He would laugh at their jokes, share their meals, and keep his secrets locked tight. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, in Dalton's arms, in Dalton's bed, in Dalton's heart, and that was everything.